Thanks, Scott. Thank you. I appreciate it. Nice to see you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here. It's good to be here at another Bay Planning Coalition meeting, which I'm sure has been just another rich set of conversations. So I'm glad to be part of it, and this one certainly will be too, given the collective expertise and capacity of this panel. I know it's going to be a good conversation on a really important topic. And it's certainly very important to us at GO-BIZ, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. As both Sean mentioned and it was just said, the trip to China was just a couple of weeks ago. It was a remarkable success on really, I think, on all measures. We wanted to open the trade office, as Sean mentioned, a really important thing to formally establish our presence, physical presence in an incredibly important market again, so we were able to do that, and that was a real success. And I certainly have to thank and commend the Bay Area Council for their leadership and partnership in helping make the office happen, make the trip happen. They really did an outstanding job, and they're a wonderful partner to us, and we're grateful for all of their efforts. We brought over about 75 business people from across the state, across a number of industries, entertainment, our lifestyle sort of economy as we call it, agriculture interests that were there, financial services folks that were there. We spent a lot of time talking about the green economy, sort of the zero carbon economy, in ways that we can grow our economy, but also tackle a critically important issue in climate change. And the governor was very direct and very open about wanting to talk about his goals on that. And I think that was reciprocated. There were a lot of rich conversations. So the trip was an enormous success, and it was an incredible eye-opener for me. I had never been there. So to see the scale of the commerce, to see the incredible ascendancy that country is on, and to appreciate the growth potential still, even though it's already such an enormous market for us, it was very eye-opening. And what it clearly illustrated to us is that to take full advantage of the opportunity that we have in China, and as Sean mentioned, in the entire Pacific, we have to ensure that here in California we're doing the right things right, that we've got the right infrastructure, we've got the right capacity, so that goods can move in a way that we are as competitive as we need to be in this ever-competitive global marketplace. So with that, I'm happy to be here and have a chance to turn it over to these experts who can offer their insights and perspectives on the topic of ensuring that California does have the infrastructure that we need to be successful. So let me quickly introduce the four panelists that we have. I'll run through all four of them. They're here, and then I'm going to turn it over to each of them to offer some comments of their own. So Ann Landstrom, to my left, is Principal Advisor at Moffatt and Nichol. Ann has a long and distinguished career as a Senior Manager in logistics and inland transportation work. She has lots of experience in ocean transportation and logistics. She's had roles in a number of industry leading sort of organizations and companies. I won't run through the whole litany, but she's got a lot of great experience, so we're glad to have you. So Ann, welcome. Phil Tagami he wears many hats, not the least of which he's chair of the Lottery Commission, which keep asking him for the lucky tickets. I'm still waiting to get one of those. But Phil, you all know, he's been involved in so many incredible development projects and initiatives here in the Bay Area and Oakland in particular, certainly not the least of which is the effort he's leading now in the transformation of the Oakland Army Base into what is going to be a state-of-the-art modern logistics facility that will be so vital to the ongoing success of the port. So Phil, it's great to see you. Speaking of the port, Kos-Read is here. Good guy, even as a Stanford guy. He's still all right. He's the Director of External Affairs for the port. He spent some time in Los Angeles at that port, but now brings his expertise here and is just doing an outstanding job in that capacity at the port. So Isaac, welcome. And then certainly last but not least is John Hummer. John is Director of Northern California Gateway of the U.S. Maritime Administration. He manages federal investment and outreach initiatives in the ports and the maritime industry in Northern California and the Mid-Pacific region. John obviously also has a long and distinguished career in and around transportation and ports. Most interestingly and notable, I think, to me, is that he also actually was and is a locomotive engineer, right? You actually drove trains at one point, so he doesn't just talk about moving goods, he can actually step in and do it if necessary, and that's pretty impressive to me. So how about a hand for our panelists? And so as I said, we'll now turn it over to each of them to make some individual comments, and we'll start with Ann. Welcome.
Is everybody awake out there? Thank you for sticking around. I know this is a bit of a long day and one of those unusually warm days that, as Senator Broxer said, it gets above 65, and I think anybody who lives in and around the Bay starts to melt a bit. So thank you for sticking around. I'm going to talk a little bit more, sort of echoing a lot of the other comments that we've had earlier today on some of the macro trade drivers that we see, a little bit more focused on the ocean container sector, because that's really what we look at. We work with ports, we design ports, we do commercial analysis, a variety of various types for ports. So that's going to be the focus rather than the entire trade, which includes, of course, a lot of the stuff that moves via air. Then we'll look at the importance of infrastructure to trade growth, just touch on that briefly, and then kind of bring it down to the regional level and show you a little bit about kind of Oakland's markets and some of the other things that are here with a more regional impact. So first of all, this is one of our favorite slides because it gets everybody's attention with all that red. Everybody talks about the budget deficit. Well, guess what? That's not really the big story. The big story, and we've heard this said already today, is the trade deficit. If we look at just the difference between the excluding oil, the difference between goods deficit and service surplus is 2.5 times different. So obviously there's something wrong with that. We're importing a lot of goods that we consume. That's why we have such a lot of trade with China. We bring in pretty much everything that you can think of, whether it be garments or shoes or electronics, and we only export a certain amount to these other places. So when we look back at that impact on job growth, we see a fairly strong correlation, for example, between 2002 and 2007, where we had a very, very good period of growth. We saw the slowest non-recessionary employment growth in that period. And the reason is that the jobs that were lost to technology and outsourcing, offshoring, that we all have heard so much about, they were not replaced with jobs that were related to exports. And that's what we're obviously very concerned about now, and what we're trying to make a change in is to grow those exports. So, and this is a kind of a little bit of a different view of some of the comments that were made just previously by the economist, gentleman, Scott Anderson. We look at the populations of the trading partners, and when we look at the Port of Oakland and other ports on the West Coast, we obviously see a huge share between the Port of Oakland and the ports of LA and Long Beach, California ports with the Asian countries. So if we look at the three Asias, as we call them, North Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, they comprise today, or as of 2010, 54.3% of the world's population. They're also, the other factor that's extremely important to consider is that many of these countries are also among the fastest growing in terms of the per capita income. So these are people that are going to have more money to spend on all the stuff that we make. So that obviously means lots of people, lots of income, lots of potential exports. So for example, some of the growth rates, it's between, say, 5 and 8% growth rate in per capita income in countries like Thailand, Vietnam, India, and China, China being the highest. So when you think about that, that's a great opportunity for us to export a variety of things. But we don't want to look in the rearview mirror, we want to look forward. So what's happening as of 2050, the projection? We look at those same regions, and the population within those three Asias, as we call them, will still be 52.8% of the world population, with the world's largest middle class. So again, this is very important. It's not just North Asia. It's India, it's Vietnam, it's Thailand, South Korea, of course, North Asia. One thing that struck me when I was thinking about this and the implications of this for us as in terms of exports, there was a piece on NPR maybe about a week ago about folks that are living in China driving to Hong Kong to buy infant formula. 3 times the price is what it would cost them in China, or more. I don't even know what that equation or what that amount was. But because they do not trust the food supply in their own country. So, and they even like companies like Simulac or ones that you've heard of that are foreign companies, they're making this product in China. Those folks won't even buy that product because they don't trust it. So we were working with a company here in Oakland not long ago, and that was one of their target commodities, was figuring out export of infant formula from, and other dried dairy products and other things from California to China. So it's, these are real stories. Let's see, next we'll go. Now we talk about the implications of infrastructure development. There's a lot of stuff on this slide, but just try and break it down into some of the key elements. If we look at ship size alone, just in terms of container ships, ships of 7,500 20-foot equivalent units or more, which are still a fairly large type of ship, comprise today about 29% of the global fleet. If we look at the order book volumes, what's coming on stream, the number of ships over 7,500 TEU jumps to 72%. That's huge. So if you look at it, half of them are over 10,000 TEU. On the right-hand pie chart, you see that greater than 10,000 TEU, 48%. So the ship little diagram right below that is one of the triple E class ships that Maersk is building, or has built, 18,000 TEU. There are only a few ports in the world that this ship can even call on. But the shipping lines are losing money, have been. They've been in very difficult situations, so they need to use the economies of scale. They need to save on fuel consumption, and using larger ships is a huge part of that. So we've all heard about the Panama Canal, and that's certainly going to is a big reason why they're moving towards these larger ships. But that's going to have a huge implication. But one thing that's interesting, if you look at these 18,000 TEU ships, they're 4 times the size of the present Panama Canal, and they're 1.5 times the size of what the Panama Canal will be when it's widened. So it's a different world out there, and it's not just the ships, it's not just the berths, it's not just the dredging, the depth of the channels and the actual dock depth or berth depth. It's also getting this freight from that ship, 18,000 or 15,000 or 12,000 TEU, multiples of that, and taking it and moving it inland, moving it to Chicago, Dallas, Memphis, all the other inland markets that are obviously huge consumption areas. So we have to look at that infrastructure development as it pertains to the rail connectivity, the roadways. We talked, Senator Boxer talked about that earlier. We're at D+. That's not good. It's not going to allow us to be competitive in terms of world trade. So that's something that we're looking at. And is Oakland ready in particular? Oakland has a lot of things going for it. The depth, the modernized terminals, many of the other things that were put in the Vision 2000 plan. That's going to be extremely helpful. The other parts, the connectivity, those are things that need to be worked on, and that takes the entire Northern California community to address those issues and look for ways to handle it. Oakland Army-based property is a great opportunity, and I know we'll be hearing more about that soon. So I won't go into too much, but we need to be ready in all those areas. Just lastly, bringing it down to sort of Oakland specific kinds of issues. If we look at what we call the secondary markets of Oakland for export, this is export specific in this case, they're the areas shaded in pink. So you look at Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, the heartland states, many of them, as well as, say, Colorado, Utah, Nevada. These are very, very big exporting, very big locations for exports, whether it be animal feed, chemicals, agricultural product, meat products, other foodstuffs. These are ones that Oakland should be tapping into in a bigger way, and we're looking for ways to make that happen. These markets represent about 1.1 million TEU. Oakland's getting about 175,000 of that. It's going through LA, and a lot of that has to do with container imbalance and the import flows and a lot of other things. But it's extremely important to look at those areas that we can tap into in terms of those exports, and what infrastructure do we need. In terms of that investment, we need to do it because our friends down in Brazil and other places like that, they're looking at the same markets that we're looking at, and they're investing, they're nipping at our heels. So it's an extremely important part of the overall equation. But definitely the Oakland Army base is an interesting and exciting prospect in terms of the development and how it can help us in both the import and the export flows attracting these cargoes. So thank you.
And thank you very much.
All right, good afternoon, and I really want to thank John Coleman and the Bay Planning Coalition for putting this together and inviting me and this panel to come here, and all the great guests we've had today. What a great day. And we are very mindful that we're standing between the drinks and the herd. So we'll try to move as fast as we can. Thank you. I'm here basically to try to talk about, the whole theme of today's talks has been about infrastructure, funding and investment, and trade. And we want more of all three. We want more infrastructure development, we want more trade, and we need the funding to put that all together. And increasingly, the reality will be in the future will be probably more public-private partnership that will have to accomplish a lot of the kinds of investments that we need. We've heard Senator Boxer and Congressman Swalwell talk about the gridlock in Washington. So, but there is stuff happening in Washington moving towards investment in infrastructure, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, mainly about the Tiger program, which has had a beneficial impact here in Northern California on the port side. You heard earlier today, Jeff was talking about the Green Trade Corridor project. MARAD managed a $30 million investment in port infrastructure supporting Sacramento, Stockton, and Oakland. We've improved the berths, we've purchased cranes for the inland ports, and we've also purchased barges for the inland ports. So suddenly the former purely break bulk and bulk ports of Stockton and Sacramento are going to be container ports. And so we're looking forward to that moving forward. Port of Stockton, as you know, has taken over that project, and we actually expect service to begin pretty soon. I can't give you a date, but it'll be pretty soon. The other project that we have a Tiger investment in is, I'm sure, something that the next two speakers will speak to, and that is the Oakland Army Base. We have a segmented portion of that project. We're going to be building some rail tracks in the port in the Oakland Army Base, and again, that whole new strategy for the port is to not be purely a container port, but also to take advantage of moving bulks, iron ores, whatever other stuff is moving right now in international trade. Big demand out there. So that's our Tiger 4 project. We call it Tiger 4. Came out last year. And I just want to announce to this audience that there is a Tiger 5 that just popped up on the radar in the last couple of weeks, about $480 million nationally available. It's a competitive thing. You got to have your application in very short order by June 3rd. Decisions will be made by September. It all has to be allocated by the end of this fiscal year. Let's see. We heard Barbara Boxer earlier today say that the ports generally, the port industry creates 13 million jobs nationally, and over about 1.2 million direct and indirect jobs immediately around the ports. Here in Northern California, there are tens of thousands of jobs that are directly related to port operations here. We know that the Port of Oakland, for instance, supports 75,000 jobs in Northern California, and who knows how many in the hinterland that Ann just mentioned. So, and then the ports of Stockton, this whole new Green Trade Corridor project, bringing new business to Stockton, which has suffered a lot of financial setback, as we all know. It's a really good thing, and so we're looking forward to more port activity here in Northern California, bringing economic development. If you look at this this map, you'll see that the Tiger program has been distributed nationally, not only along the coastal periphery, but also in the inland river ports. And it's moving forward. Again, there's going to be a new effort here. There are not only gateway ports involved in Tiger funding, such as Oakland, such as LA Long Beach, but also smaller, mid-sized ports in the hinterland. So that's happening, and that's something that's really, really positive. It's being spread around. The way I view it is a federal funding foothold. That's alliteration for you. Federal funding foothold in port infrastructure nationally, and we hope that it becomes a precedent in the future. Everybody's seen this map. There's a similar, this is trucking, heavy trucking use, congested roadways, red lines indicating, almost stuff moving at capacity. There's a similar rail map that looks almost exactly the same. But if you note the blue dots are the major gateway ports in America, and each and every one of those is a major freight generator, both on the import side and the export side. So it's absolutely critical that as we move towards more funding for our infrastructure, that ports be part of that funding package being considered by US DOT and by Congress. So you can see right there that this is a huge generator for freight. And so we heard earlier today mention of the ASCE report that just basically gives us, as Senator Boxer said, I think a D+, which is probably even being kind, because there are a lot of areas that are in failure in terms of our overall infrastructure. And in terms of ports, we rank 22nd in the world in terms of the healthy infrastructure elements within our own port environment. Puts us behind Estonia and Iceland. So we've got a lot of makeup to do. We have, we've heard from, we had Secretary LaHood had a couple of national port meetings over the last couple of years. And he asked the ports to come together and give us a sense of what it is their priorities are, what are their concerns. You can see on this slide here that one of the things we hope MAP 21 and any future transportation program will address is providing a national freight strategy, and a subpart of that has to be a national port strategy, a national maritime strategy to keep us in the game. We have to be part of world markets. We need to export. We need our ports to do that. And so that was one of the things that the port leaders said. Funding gaps in infrastructure repair, inadequate links to major corridors. By the way, the Tiger program is not just for port infrastructure per se, but it's also for that last mile. Some of the projects that we're doing now are rail yards near the port. The Gerald Desmond Bridge got a piece of the Tiger grant. The Colton Crossing in San Bernardino, 100 miles away from the ports of LA and Long Beach, I consider to be a port-related project, and there's a Tiger grant that went in there to close the gap between the state and the private railroad funding to make that happen. So we're looking to try to push this funding program forward, hopefully not just as the small program that it is now, but much more in a programmatic way. And that gets us, I think, to the last slide, and that is there's been legislation that calls on the Maritime Administration to, as Archie Bunker said, take the bull by the horns and start to move forward with developing a national freight port infrastructure development program, and we are starting to move in that direction. We're calling it a Strong Ports Initiative, and we want to be the modal representative for federal funding in port infrastructure development. Initially, we're probably going to be involved with planning elements with ports, probably medium-sized ports that need additional planning efforts to move a project forward. But MARAD is going to be part of that initiative, and again, pushing forward trade and freight movement and all of that through ports. Thank you.
All right, John, thank you. Thanks, John. All right, Isaac, you're up next. Come on.
That was a lightning round here. This is great. Thank you, Kish, and thank you, John. Bay Planning Coalition, great organization, great partners of ours. And thank you for saving the best for last. Of course, I exclude myself, I mean our panel overall, and especially our final speaker, Phil Tagami, who almost single-handedly is going to be helping us develop some new modern infrastructure that will hopefully lead to some more jobs. Make sure I got my clicker here. So if there's one thing that I've accomplished since I started with the port, it's making sure that everybody knows that number, 73,000. John, you were close. If you're close in the above direction, that's okay. So 75,000, I'll take it. 75,000 jobs across the region are generated by the Port of Oakland. Now, that's the Port of Oakland writ large. That includes the Oakland International Airport, our commercial real estate, which we're sitting and enjoying right now, as well as the seaport. And it's an impressive number, and it's impressive that it reaches not only throughout the immediate region, but throughout the greater Bay Area, and even throughout Northern California, and the entire state of California. Now, today I want to get something that hopefully leads to some good cocktail conversation later. It's not all good news, and sometimes we get together as an industry and we talk only about how important we are and how great we are, and there's actually some challenges that we face. If you get behind that 73,000 number, and usually we don't do this, but if you get behind it, what percentage of those jobs are actually due to the seaport and trade coming through the port? Only about 40%, and it's been a declining share. So the reality is we got some challenges we've got to deal with as a gateway. And these challenges matter a lot because these are great jobs that we're talking about. Congressman Swalwell talked about the middle class. Well, the port employs the middle class and helps people get into the middle class. And how many industries and agencies are actually doing that these days? Not everyone's going to go work for Twitter and Zynga. There needs to be people who are moving boxes from point A to point B, and then eventually managing people moving boxes from point A to point B. And that's one of the things that the port can do. So what are our challenges? Well, not surprisingly, we were hit. We're like the barometer for the economy at large, and we were brutally hit by the Great Recession. Just look at that drop-off after the Great Recession in our passenger volume. And the main two drivers of jobs through the port, number of passengers coming through our airport, number of boxes coming across our docks. The good news story, though, is we're ready to handle more volume right now without having to invest in our infrastructure. As you've been down to the airport, we got a great airport. You can get in and out fast. We're ready to add volume now, and what we were doing in China with Kish and the state was, in fact, trying to drive more volume through our existing facilities. On the seaport side, it's a similar story, with perhaps even greater challenges. Again, we're operating about 50% capacity. We're built to handle nearly 4 million TEUs. And while, yes, Sean Randolph pointed out that it's great news that we're getting back to pre-recession volumes around 2.34 million TEUs, we're built to handle 4 million. I went out into East Oakland at a church out there, and I said, that's like building a church to handle 400 people, and you only got 200 people each Sunday. That's a problem. On top of that, we're having to sign a series of new leases in this down economy. That's a challenge that we're not going to be able to face on our own. One thing that Ann didn't delve into too much, so I'll get a chance to do that a bit, is more of our export leakage. On the one hand, we're known as a great export gateway, and it is a wonderful story to tell. You heard the speaker at lunch talk about the 6 top exports, and one of those, almonds, really? Yeah, well, most of them are coming across our docks and generating jobs here in our region. But unfortunately, even on the exports side, it's not all good news. We're actually leaking about 15%, an equivalent of 15% of our volume, out of the immediate region. And where's that going? That's going down to LA and Long Beach, other gateways that have, relatively speaking, stronger gateway infrastructure. Why? Lack of first port call of service, high cost of rail service, pilot jet. It's a whole mixture of things because we're one link in the supply chain, right? So we get down to 50 feet, yay. We stay at 50 feet, great. But you've got to have the equivalent quality of infrastructure throughout the entire supply chain on both the public and private sector side, and that's what we don't have yet. We're being outspent roughly by an order of magnitude, maybe even a couple orders of magnitude, and it's really shocking. If you look at our capital needs assessment for the next 5 years, $640 million roughly, across our airport, seaport, and commercial real estate. So if you take that maritime number, 153 million divided by 5, and our CFO hates when I do this because these are rough numbers, and it doesn't take into account all that we've spent up to this point. But if you take just that simple number, 153 divided by 5, you're looking at roughly $30 million a year in investment on our seaport. These are what the top ports in the country are investing this year alone. LA and Long Beach, $1 $1 billion. New York, New Jersey, $345 million. And this comes as part of a Collier's report called CapEx or Capsize. Now, I'll give him credit for a dramatic title, but there's a grain of truth in that. If we don't keep investing in our gateway, even beyond that which we've already done, it's like the public sector equivalent of grow or die. We've got to keep growing. Now, what this does not account for, and which Phil's going to talk about, is that this is only spending by the port, and we're not doing this alone. We have the partnership, the F3, I'm not going to try to repeat that alliteration, but the F3 partnership with the feds, and then we have the private sector coming in to drive private investment through our gateway, and that alone gets us closer to the New York, New Jersey number, and that's the great news that we have to share. So we've got to compete as a region. Everybody else is doing it. They're starting to unify the regions. We've got to do the same. If you look at the Southern California model, it's really stunning. In fact, Tess Langell here from the Alameda County Transportation Commission was telling me that the Southern Californians have their act together so well that their data and their planning is now informing the state planning and informing the federal planning. So we've got to come back together as a region and repeat the successes that got us down to 50 feet working together in our federal channel, that got us all the federal money and the state money that's going to help us build the Oakland Army Base project. But we've got to repeat that and keep that vibrant partnership going. So what's our response? We got to build a regional freight stakeholder alliance and get Measure B1 expanded, extended, get it passed, and make sure there's a lot of money in there going to our freight infrastructure. The public sector value proposition is huge, but we've got to really come together as an industry and make that compelling case. We've got to, of course, continue to keep it deep. We've been doing a great job at that, making sure we get adequate money out of the feds and working with the Corps and all the folks in this room. We can't lose sight of that. And I'm going to leave the next one to our partner here, Phil Tagami, to continue transforming the Oakland Army Base. You know, there's lots of misinformation about the Oakland Army Base. The good news is that the $500 million first phase is moving forward. And that's thanks to our partnership with the city, and that's thanks to the private sector stepping up to the plate, Phil Tagami and Prologis, and making sure that they're bringing the private sector investment into the mix. And it looks like I've been cut off, so I'm going to hand it off to our next speaker.
Nicely done, Isaac. Thank you. Well done. All right, and then bat and clean up. Phil Tagami to talk about the Oakland Army Base. Phil?
Thanks, Kish. I want to first say that all of these efforts are clearly a true partnership. Everyone in the room looking around and seeing a lot of familiar faces, we're really kind of all in this together. The hundreds of people that have needed to come together, not only on the policy side, on a federal stage, statewide, and then regionally, and then locally, to drive these initiatives. We look at the opportunity as a global one, but really have to carry out the actual boots on the ground delivery of the project on a very, very local basis. The slide that's up on the screen is, in essence, the phase one of this project. And the notion that we would engage in master planning and somehow deliver everything that was conceived with one swipe of the hand is really kind of a fallacy. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. We live in an era with lots of rules. I'm a young 47-year-old, so in my short lifetime, California has passed about 60,000 new laws that didn't exist before 1965. And so when you apply that to trying to build a building with CEQA and with a lot of the regulations that flow from CEQA to a lot of the other agencies that are responsible to regulate the world we live in, we realize those are some of the challenges that we face. A lot of my colleagues wax eloquently about how fast they get things done in China, but the last time I went there, I had respiratory distress. So it's very important that one of the things we want to achieve here in the glamorous wilds of California is just that. We want them to remain the glamorous wilds of California, and we want to be able to breathe the air and enjoy the lifestyle that we have here. So we need to do things in a responsible and an environmentally responsible way. So if we look at the phase one of this project, we are really relying on our colleagues at the Port of Oakland to deliver the first phase of the rail connectivity and see a real strong partnership with the Class 1 railroads. And we have some gentlemen here from Union Pacific Railroad today. And it's an imperative that we understand our role is to really help serve their customer. And in essence, help serve the port's customer. And in essence, they're all our customer. We're delivering a facility and a place for our other customers, our tenants, to be able to conduct their business. An important part of our business is understanding what we call the beneficial cargo owners and what they want, and our ability to attract them to this location, because they, in essence, are the people who are making the orders and deciding that the Port of Oakland would be a destination for their cargo or a point of embarkation to export goods and commodities to support the President's export initiative. In dollars and cents, getting right down to brass tacks, if we look at this slide, it kind of gives a sense of what this public-private partnership's about. The state of California, through its Prop 1B TCIF program, is putting $242.1 million into this community. This is the largest grant in Northern California. It's by far something that was widely supported by a very large geographical area we'll call a mega region. This is a group of governments, a coalition of governments that represents, on a smaller side, things like ACTC, and brings those minds and those communities together to understand what the region needs. MTC was very supportive, helped deliver this as a priority. The private investment, roughly $125 million, ourselves and our joint venture partners in Prologis. The city of Oakland has $54.5 million of funds that we call restricted funds. These are the obligations of the economic development transfer when the federal government closed the base, transferred it to the state, and then subsequently to the city and the port. These dollars were rents that were collected from the base operation that needed to be spent on infrastructure. Two recycling firms that are located in West Oakland have made a commitment to come to the base. Their dollars match the state dollars. That's $46.6 million, about 9.3%. The Port of Oakland, $15.7 million, and of course the Tiger money for $15 million. So all of those buckets of money cobbled together really deliver the first phase of this project. Isaac referenced tests earlier from ACTC and the importance of putting Measure B back on the ballot and making that happen. There are two bills that were introduced in this last legislative session. They were both tabled by the Pro Tem, Darrell Steinberg. We are in an ongoing dialogue with the Pro Tem and with the Governor to encourage those to be reintroduced with language modification. The bill drafting got a little loose, I will say, and did not clearly define the type of taxes that would be sought to be able to raise these monies to pay for infrastructure, and some of the tax groups got a little nervous. They were considering property tax, when in essence what was contemplated was sales tax. So it's important that we see that this legislation make its way back so we can reintroduce the notion of a enhanced sales tax for Alameda County to help deliver infrastructure. It's critical. Right now, the state of California faces about a $280 billion with a B billion dollar shortfall in the Highway Trust Fund through 2021. And so the era of the state being a project delivery entity is really coming to a close, and it's time for the state to operate or manage the system that it has built over the last 30 years. In saying that, there's still a lot of key areas that need to be focused on, choke points, if you will, where we need to have targeted dollars to finish the good work that's been done over the last 3 decades. And so we evolve into operating a system more than building out a system. As a part of that, opportunities for local private partners around the state to help deliver the last mile, to help deliver the elements that will provide not only the connectivity, but the throughput required to put people back to work and realize the opportunity and potential. This last slide I show is not to get you dizzy or to cause other problems that you may have, but just to illustrate in a very complex world with a lot of rules, the need to have concurrent activity to get things done. You will never have all the people and all the material and all the money and all the approvals at one time and what place to move things forward, but only through the collaborations and teamwork of a lot of dedicated people working together to move these things forward will they get done. My father used to say that 9 women cannot make a baby in 1 month, and that's a true statement. Some things just take time. But in the same measure, I think what we can do is agree that if we find ways to improve our communication and our collaboration, we can not only bring the baby into the world, but we can make sure that it's properly cared for and raised and can be productive members of society. So we look at these projects and look at the opportunity and see a lot of good that can come from them. Now, really to kind of wrap up where we are, Tuesday we'll be before the California Transportation Commission for the last action they need to take on a very large portion of this funding so the project can move forward in September. And it's after 5 years of hard work from hundreds of people. I think last count we had about 745 people who had a significant role in bringing this project forward. So on behalf of all of those folks, people at the Port of Oakland, people at the City of Oakland, people at the State of California, and the CTC, and MTC, and just stakeholders, you know, Mayor Ellie Wooten from Merced, all walks that have helped make this possible. We're very proud of the work that's been done, but we know there's a lot more work to continue. In that we mean there's a phase 2. And in that we mean there's more opportunity and more potential to be sought. The future rail development should be able to accommodate about 400,000 lifts. Right now the initial phase is really just a storage yard. We see that potential and we're working tirelessly with our friends at the Port of Oakland and in the region to make sure that that can be delivered to really make this mission possible. So with your help and the collaboration that I see possible, I think we have good things in our future, not just in this moment, but really for many, many years to come. And with that, back to Kish.
Thank you, Phil. Nicely stated. Well done, and thanks for your leadership on that obviously critically important element of what we're talking about today. All right, good. Well, we'll take a few minutes for just a few questions. I see a few coming up here. I'm going to take a look at this one, but one thing that was just on my mind that maybe I'll start with, and just hand you the mic, and any of you that want to comment on it, feel free to pass if you don't have anything to add, but just to sort of elaborate a little bit on what I think about as sort of the east-west connections, you know, coming from the port, right? So all the infrastructure that we need to get all the goods that are coming in and get them out to their destinations. And I think so much about, for instance, what's happening in the Central Valley and how we have increasingly we're the world's breadbasket and all that incredible productivity and agriculture that's happening there, but to ensure that we're getting adequate flow of those goods to the port so they can get out to their customers. What do we need? Talk a little bit more about what's necessary in terms of infrastructure from an east-west perspective, and how on earth are we going to pay for it?
I wouldn't really presume to say how we're going to pay for this, but when we look at kind of how port gateways work and the connectivity to the hinterland markets, it was stated earlier that I believe it was 40% of the cargo that comes into the West Coast moves to points east of here, to those markets that I mentioned earlier. When we look at the railroad investment and how that's moving, it's primarily moving through the Southern California gateway ports. So we've got huge investments by both BNSF and UP in the Sunset Corridor for UP and the Transcon for BNSF. Oakland, this is a secondary location for moving that freight from this West Coast area to those other markets. The other places that are moving this freight are places like Prince Rupert. They've developed an extremely efficient network getting goods from the port to these markets like Chicago and Memphis and other, even Eastern Canada, et cetera. They combined their efforts with the CN and the Canadian government. They have a national port strategy, which is much different than we have here. So we're seeing that kind of north and south, you know, shift. We're also, of course, seeing the effects of the Suez Canal routings for cargoes coming out of Southeast Asia, et cetera. So for Oakland to play in that, we've got to get some other cargo concentration here, some attraction, whether it be by attracting logistics providers that will come in and put in a rapid deployment cross-dock, super cross-dock, or whatever type of facility that's going to attract the imports. We're going to have to obviously look at those export cargoes like the grains and the other agricultural commodities. So this basically will be what attracts the railroad investment. The cargo is what they're looking for, and any ability we have to create a competitive situation between the two, that's also a good thing. So I would say those are the points we have to think about.
Well, one of the things that we're looking at is that, you know, there's the President's National Export Initiative, And that is trying to move stuff that we do well here in America. And you know, yes, we're doing, Apple is doing wonderfully, and we're doing all these kinds of exports, but there's also animal hides and grains that are moving from the Midwest to insatiable demand in Asia. The natural place for those to come is to the West Coast ports. And LA Long Beach are chock-a-block with containers and the ability to move break bulks or bulks in those ports may not be, you know, there's not just that much, a lot of space. But here in Northern California, we've got this Oakland Army Base initiative that's going to hopefully open up that kind of commodity export for, you know, which is hugely beneficial, not just to this region, but also to Midwest and others. It'll all be brought here by rail. But Stockton also is already moving a lot of bulks. And so we have the infrastructure here in Northern California that may not exist down in Southern California to move, to really take advantage of this national export initiative. But we need infrastructure. And it has to be public-private. Hopefully we get the feds involved in a more programmatic way. Certainly the state has stepped up, as Phil noted, through the TCIF program. And Phil himself represents the front end of a private sector investment that we're hoping will expand.
I think facilities are very important. Clearly, earlier in my earlier comments, the beneficial cargo owners play an important role. They look for certainty, credibility, and capacity to land a substantial investment in facilities. And let's use an example of saying you're going to spend somewhere between $60 a square foot for a throughput facility. If you were building cold storage, you're going to be spending $125, $130 a foot. Clearly making a link between the export of agricultural product. We have about 422 high quality food products grown in California that we'd like to get to market. They say if you can't sell it, you'll smell it. Clearly the goal of handling that food, it's got to be done in a safe and efficient manner, and we want to preserve its quality. So to land those facilities, you need a long-term commitment. You need a 60-plus year commitment to be able to justify spending hundreds of millions of dollars in new facilities. One of the great challenges that the port or city has to face, and when it has these lands that it controls, is the ability to realize if it's not going to put the capital up, it has to give someone a long-term right to operate that and not only be able to recapture their investment, and I'll use a dirty word, yes, make a profit. Because you can't justify deploying capital if you're not getting a return on your investment. And you have to meet some modicum of a return that meets a threshold that's acceptable in the marketplace. Otherwise, you'd be in your boxer shorts at home trading stocks on your day trading software. So it's important that there's some relevance to the marketplace and a reasonable return. A lot of the Chinese investment today in US is expecting 15 to 18% returns compounded. And a lot of the US dollars willing to be deployed for these types of projects are willing to accept far lower returns and also tolerate much more aggressive regulatory environs because they are conditioned and aware that those are the rules that we have to play by in this country. So the opportunity's there, but we have to find a re-education from some of our relationships to realize what the market will accept and absorb, and done in an open and transparent fashion.
4 simple things. Number 1 question about what do we need in terms of east-west connections, better rail connections, more cold storage infrastructure, which is the cold supply chain stuff that Phil was talking about. Where's the money going to come from? People love to say it's really complex. There's all these different answers. It's not that complex. Local? No. State? Probably not. Feds? Thank you for the money you guys do provide, but if you look back at Phil's slide, it's 3% from the feds. They're not going to ride in on a white horse and solve our problems. It's regional money, Measure B, and it's private money. And probably the latter is going to be the biggest contributor to solving our infrastructure needs. And yes, that does raise the challenges that Phil's talked about. That private money is going to expect certain things that the public sector is going to have to struggle with, contemplating.
Thanks for those comments. That's interesting. And One thing that I would note was, again, it was probably obvious to many in this room, but to me very eye-opening, again, when we went to China, is what seems like an incredible, almost a bottomless pit of capital that exists in that country that wants to get placed in the United States, and they're eager to do a lot of that in California. So one thing to think about is how do we, and one thing we're working on in our office that we'd love to collaborate with you and people in this room is how do we create a pipeline to welcome in that investment and match it up with projects, but do it in a way that makes sense for the market and makes sense for those investments. So I think that's an ongoing area. And I do want to take the opportunity that I was remiss that one of the things that we announced on the trip was a $1.5 billion private investment in the project that Signature is working on here in south of Jack London Square. So that's an illustration of tremendous interest by one investor, and I think there's a lot more where that came from. And unlike the commander, who was so gracious in his comments about not wanting to take credit for things that happened on his watch because they've been a long time in the works, that doesn't work in the political environment. We're very pleased to take advantage and announce all positive things that happen on our watch. So that's an example of that. Another question that I have for the panel, thinking about the environment that we're in, and Phil touched on it, I'd like to elaborate on it, is, here's an easy question. How do we harmonize all of this commerce that we want to promote, all of the infrastructure that needs to get built to do that? How do we harmonize that with our environmental goals and the regulatory climate that we have and that we've constructed in the pursuit of important goals, but where it often is at odds with this commerce and this infrastructure that we want to construct? How do we work through those difficulties? You want to start?
We already have a lot of unfunded mandates, and I think, what do they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions? Or there's the little story, the fish swimming hits a wall, and what's it called? Dam? No, it's actually called the peripheral canal. No, I'm teasing. That's a water joke. Anyway, no, in all seriousness, I think the question goes to say we need to take a hard stop on a lot of the laws and rules that we're trying to change and give the marketplace an opportunity to catch up and institute those rules. We're such a highly regulated society. Every professional who works for us is licensed. We have licensed civil engineers and soils engineers and structural engineers and architects and planners, and everyone's running around with their licenses and their risk managers and their insurance policies. But then on top of that, there's another cadre of people there to inspect that in real time. And then, of course, then there are people who have to hire and pay for it. So I think one of the things we need to look to is streamlining our processes, understanding if you're a licensed professional and you're using your stamp and your education and your reputation, that should mean something. And when we pay for that opinion and you stamp those drawings, that should be good to go by way of your permit. And if you play loose and fast with that, you're going to lose your ticket to the game and you can no longer practice. We don't need to have 15 layers on top of that that just kind of slow down and retard the system. So we need to find a way to streamline that. So that's important. All right, Isaac.
Well, and how do we actually get there? I think that we got to tout our governor and some old-fashioned leadership. I mean, it's going to take someone forcing people to the table to have the uncomfortable discussions. And thankfully, we do have someone in office right now who's willing to do that, who comes from the side of the aisle that is traditionally pro-regulation, but himself has had to deal with some of those challenges back when he was mayor. And I think took that perspective up to Sacramento. The last slide that you saw from Phil Tagami's presentation, I call it the Tagami Tangle. All those boxes mixed together. I mean, here we are touting the success of the Oakland Army base. It's, what year is it? 2013? What year did the BRAC process start? It's been over 2 decades to get to the point where we're breaking ground this month. To take China as an example, and there are downsides to this, and not every example is a perfect example, but they have a deep water port in Shanghai called Yantian, and they decided they were going to place the deep water port there in 2003, I believe, roughly. And 3 years later, they had taken an island, a fishing village of about 3,000 people, and turned it into a port that is today handling the same volume as the ports of LA and Long Beach. Oh, and along the way, they built a 20-mile bridge out to that port. They did all of that in 3 years. So, here our panel is about modern infrastructure and jobs. What was modern 20 years ago isn't modern today, and if we don't get our act together, what we're planning ain't going to be modern by the time it's done.
one of the beneficial conversations I had today is something that often comes up when we're talking about the regulatory environment, and that is you have to have an economy if you want to do the environmental mitigation that is needed around here over hundreds of years of abuse. And that's up and down the coast all the way. So you have to have an economy, and there has to be a balance. When I was with the state of California, we looked at that at Business Transportation and Housing Agency. We tried to look at the Goods Movement Action Plan as a balancing act. Of course, it kind of dissolved sometimes into acrimony, but between the various partners. But it was always intended to be essentially a template for the state of California to balance both economic development and environmental action. And one of the beneficial conversations I also had and was with the Port of Redwood City here. I hope they're still here. That is, they need to be dredged, and this is for Colonel Baker to hear. They need to be dredged down there. They want to be dredged. One of the great things is that the dredge materials from their dredging is actually doing a lot of really good environmental mitigation on wetlands and other things. So I think that that's a poster child right there for both a dual approach. You get the job done that helps the port expand and its business, and the beneficial byproduct is expanded wetlands. So
I just wanted to mention one thing, and that is that ports are great leaders in this area of doing things that are good for the environment and also continue to move cargo. I think if you look at the shore power initiative that's going on, which also was partially funded by Tiger grant money, if I'm not mistaken, right? And you look at the Clean Truck Act down in Southern California, you know, the communities were very upset, obviously, about the emissions and the trucking impact. So, you know, that's a positive note here. Ports definitely are going to be able to provide leadership, and we should engage them in that way. So, Isaac, you have your work cut out for you.
All right, well, let's go to the last question here. We'll just do a quick, in the spirit of the old SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Maybe if each of you just wants to give us quickly what you think is, for our region in this topic, our biggest opportunity and our biggest threat.
I would say our biggest opportunity is in attracting more of those export cargoes that we talked about. Isaac mentioned this whole leakage issue that we're looking at. There are a lot of commodities that move out of or that come from this region. We want to make sure, such as almonds and dried fruit and nut and other types of food products as well as other things, we want to make sure that we continue to provide the ability to export those. I think on the refrigerated cargoes, there's a huge opportunity. I've been talking to several folks about that and putting a more modern type of facility that would be able to handle export transloading as well as temperature controlled docks for doing this transload, temporary storage, et cetera. That's a great opportunity. I would say that one thing in terms of a weakness and a threat that we need to be concerned about, we're already seeing this, these larger ship sizes that are coming on stream. This is definitely a situation where there are going to be winners and losers. We're not going to all be able to handle these huge ships. They're not going to make as many calls as they have in the past. So that's something that we need to watch out for. We need to provide the right kinds of things here that will attract those ships. We have the deep water. We have to make sure that we go after the other things that are necessary, as we've been talking about.
Well, we heard earlier that business doesn't want to just come here because we're pretty with this nice weather that we have and beautiful environment that we have. They want to come here when there's a business opportunity. And the business opportunity here is that we have the Port of Oakland, for instance, just inherited with the city 366 acres off the Army base. What other port on the entire west coast of this continent has that available to be developed and improve business and generate jobs for the local community? That's a big deal for the Port of Oakland and the City of Oakland. Not only the construction of the project, but the long-term jobs that will be there. So that's a huge opportunity, and the infrastructure is needed to capture that, that opportunity. In terms of a threat, if we don't do that, and who knows what will happen post-Panama. MARAD has got a crystal ball and throwing tea leaves out there to see what's going on. Our guess is as good as anybody else's, but the threat is that we will not be a centerpiece of this global commerce if we don't capture the business both on the import and the export side. We have a huge opportunity here. Let's do it. Otherwise, who knows?
I think the opportunities are right in front of us, both with our abundant and available labor force that can be trained for the specific jobs to start making things again, and not just be a service-based economy. There is no shame in educating our young people, so if they want to support themselves with a working job, they can do so with dignity and get a good salary while they do it. If they want to go into higher education, that's fine. Not everyone's going to be a college professor, so we need to make sure that we give young people a choice to be able to support themselves. And the type of economy that we can reintroduce into California that is handling not only quality food product, but quality manufacturing of things that the world is going to want, we can seize a segment of the market that other communities and other countries are looking past, which is high quality production, not just cheap, bountiful goods, but more limited production of the highest quality that you can find anywhere in the world. And then the risk is too much talk and not enough action. And so we use a term in our office we call the OODA loop. You observe, orient, decide, and act, and you repeat. And the faster you get in the practice of evaluating those circumstances and taking action, the sooner things get done and the more efficient and more effective you become. And so we do a good job of describing a problem and then talking it to death, and we miss markets. And so we need to close the OODA loop and get faster and more efficient at making those decisions.
Well, I would take what Ann and John said and say that the market opportunity is exports and the immediate leakage, and the way to solve that is doing the Army-based project right, quickly, and making it work for that market on the opportunity side. And on the threat side, I think the word that comes to mind is disunity. I guess it's related to dysfunctionality that Phil described. Since I've been with the port, we've been shut down, twice by the community writ large, once by our own labor union, and we need to get all on the same page and realize, I guess it goes to making sure that the opportunity that we talked about benefits our communities, benefits deeply our region. And we need to make sure that it's both real and perceived benefits, because I think there are a lot of benefits in terms of the environmental work we've done, in terms of the jobs. But we got to make sure everybody recognizes those, values those, understands the magnitude of those, and also make sure we're continuing to create real benefits for our community, because otherwise we're going to continue to face that disunity and challenge that's going to make any kind of infrastructure useless if it's shut down. Any sort of success useless if you can't get those goods to market.
Well, Isaac, thank you, and thanks a lot for those comments. I think it's clear that there is an opportunity, and it is going to take focus, determination, unity, not disunity. We have to keep our eye on the prize, right? If we know what the opportunities are and where we're headed, we know that there's issues to work through, but I think that there's a willingness of leadership to organize around the urgency of now to make things happen. And with the expertise of folks like you and the people in this room, I think this has been a good conversation, a good opportunity to build on and make things happen. So to Isaac, Phil, John, and Ann, nice job. Folks, let them hear it. Thank you very much.